talking honestly, when a company is breached and reports it, what percentage is usually softening the truth or just plain bullshit?
So data reputation is a massively misreported area of these kind of communications with the ICO, and it stems from the fact that organizations and everybody else treats them like ogres, the big scary regulator that isn't going to understand.
50% of those SMBs that get hit by a ransomware are out of business within 6 months.
Hitting the panic button, and they just want whatever is happening to stop. So they hit that panic button. We lose so much evidence as a result of so many of those steps that businesses take in their own quite heavy-handed containment measures.
I think for SMEs, the really core thing is it doesn't have to be a death sentence.
We saw an incident, again, a number of months ago now, where somebody had received, the classic message from impersonating the CEO. And it normally ends with somebody going off and buying some iTunes gift cards from a shop down the road and sending them over. But in this case, the person received a WhatsApp message from somebody purporting to be their CEO and said, I've got a task that I need you to complete. Do you mind jumping on this Teams call quickly? And they sent them a Teams meeting invite. And the individual clicked on it, joined the Teams meeting invite, and saw their CEO for a second or two. And then the Teams meeting dropped. They got another WhatsApp message saying, sorry, my signal's really bad.
Don't be embarrassed to then go and check. Don't be embarrassed to say you don't know or you're not sure.
At the moment is in phishing campaigns. It's where all these new technologies start. It's the bread and butter of these threat groups and of incidents that's taking place. It used to be the fact that a threat actor had to choose.
You have to have a certain characteristic that means that they're able to deal with a business's worst day every single day.
It's a much better idea to accept that your employees are going to be using this technology and train them to do it properly than it is to outright ban it and lose all of that visibility.
The company will be absolutely pushing and screaming for the answers, and they need to have the authority and the confidence to say either I need some more information, I need some more time, we're doing everything we can, let me hold your hand through this.
It takes around 20 photos on average to build a convincing AI deepfake of a child or a minor.
Yes, it takes 20 photos to generate a deepfake a year ago. It takes 1 or 2 now to generate a decent one, with like Google Gemini getting really, really good at image generation and all of these other models. It'll take a single photo really in probably the next month or so.
Take us into the war room, and let's say it's 2 a.m. in the morning. There's a ransom note on the screen. Everybody's sweating, certainly the CEO. This is a Secure CyberConnect podcast with Jay Adamson and Warren Atkinson, where we're joined by information, cybersecurity, technology and HR professionals who share their journeys, unique perspectives and offer advice and guidance. Our topics on this episode will be the fight to protect our families and businesses, digital forensics and incident response. Today we're delighted to be joined by Poole and Ollie Fletcher. Will is the co-founder and CEO of Strand Intelligence, a UK-based cybersecurity platform for digital forensics and incident response. He specialises in handling complex cyber incidents, including ransomware and advanced persistent threat incidents, digital forensics and security engineering. Will was previously the principal cyber investigation officer for the Information Commissioner's Office, where he was investigating some of the most high-profile data breaches to hit the UK. As a result of this experience, he's covered deeply technical aspects of the frontline response and very much the bigger picture, regulatory, privacy and compliance aspects of cybersecurity. Will's view is that whilst most of the innovation within cybersecurity is typically proactive, just stopping threats, the number of incidents continues to rise. And that's not just against the large and high-profile businesses that you see in the media, but across a high number of small and medium-sized businesses across all sectors. And he believes that the security industry has always used the not if, but when cliche. And certainly when it comes to cyber incidents, it's not really developed accessible tools for businesses to use in the moment when it arrives. Ollie is also co-founder at Strand, where he's focused on scaling with the right partners and proving that reactive security can be fast, intelligent and accessible to every organisation. With a strong consultancy background that includes many years of project management for CGI, practice lead for Glue and senior management roles for Sprint Reply, he's been responsible for all key areas of product design and analysis and has considerable expertise in building strategic relationships to ensure business excellence. Ollie, welcome to the Secure CyberConnect podcast, and thank you for joining us today.
Not at all. Thank you very much for having us. Very excited to see what we're going to be discussing today.
Great to be.
Jen, myself, been really looking forward to today's session. I know it's been a long time in the planning, and I know you guys have got a busy schedule today. So, Will, can you kick things off by giving the audience a high-level overview of some of the key themes and topics we're going to be exploring today?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that the shortest way of putting it is we're going to look at the kind of past, present, and future of incident response and the threats that are facing businesses, and looking at it from the perspective of what businesses actually go through when a cyber incident hits. At the end of the day, organizations generally like to not publicly disclose that. So there's not a lot of discourse about what happens in those kind of hours, days and weeks after a P1 major cyber incident hits an organization. So looking at what that has looked like in the past and where we think that it's going to go in the future.
That's fascinating. Can't wait to unpack all of that. I know it's going to be a masterclass for both professionals and aspiring leaders. And Will, of course, Ollie, what's something that you're perhaps proud of that isn't featured on your LinkedIn and that people may not know about yourself?
Cheers, Warren. So I think the thing that people do know about me is that I was running a team in a consultancy for the last few years of my career. And a lot of that professional pride comes from delivering AI technology, but actually ensuring it gets the adoption and gets the use and value that's needed. I guess something that people probably don't know about me is in my younger years, I ran a record label based in London. So we did lots of making music, playing music all across the city.
Absolutely. And I think that it would be fair to say that Ollie's previous experience in selling tickets to those events has helped us in a recent event that we did at Strand. So I don't think he expected those worlds to cross at any point, but you can see those skills coming out pretty clearly.
Definitely. I've used to work in industry, nightlife myself many years ago, and it's still a nighttime job now in cyber, isn't it?
Round
always, never ends.
So, Will, of course, we often learn from our mistakes and scars. Was there a specific incident in your career where you realised that regulatory, the tools, the consultants, they're all failing, and at what point did you decide that you want to sort of take on yourself to drive change?
Yeah, so I think there's two kind of areas where I've seen the kind of tools, the regulators, and essentially everybody involved in an incident being perhaps not as effective as they could be. I'll go for the first point in a frontline responder. So our role generally when we go into responding to a cyber incident is to understand, how did it happen? How has this threat actor gained access to the network? What have they done? Have they stolen data? Have they installed something that's going to let them back in after all the recovery work's been done? Have they encrypted systems, stolen sensitive personal information, etc.? Now, 9 times out of 10 in my career, that's been a ransomware incident. Those are very loud. There's a very clearly something has gone wrong, and it's very obvious to the organization that they've been hit with an incident like this. They come in on a Monday morning, they can't access their systems. There's ransom notes on all the devices. As I say, you can't really ignore that. But there is an entire different raft of incidents, generally that we refer to as advanced persistent threats, where the threat actor's goal is not to cause damage. It's actually not to be discovered at all. They're there to slowly take information away over the course of weeks, months, and we have seen it before, years at a time. The kind of areas of failure there is when we're doing a ransomware incident, we can anchor our investigation around something very specific, the creation of the ransom note, the actual encryption event, something very clearly malicious that we can work backwards from to kind of pull on the thread or the strand, if you look, pardon the pun there, back to exactly how the incident has taken place. For the former, when we have just very quiet, extremely talented, often nation-state backed threat actors who are just laying quietly, slowly siphoning information off, you're looking for a needle in a haystack. And that is made worse by the fact that these are often against large organizations. You're not generally going to have an advanced persistent threat actor targeting your hometown manufacturing business or the small law firm down the roads. They're targeting the public sector. They're targeting the large internet service providers and these major organizations. And when you're given the green light to say, we think we've been compromised, please can you find them? That is immensely challenging, because at that moment, their antivirus has failed, their EDR's failed, all of these proactive tools have already missed this threat. You have to rely on the forensic investigation at that moment in time. Forensics is extremely slow. We're having to have human beings look over all of that information, and that can be very quickly hundreds of systems, millions, if not tens or hundreds of millions of logs to sift through, and the anomaly detection there is super difficult. Kind of applying, and what we're looking to do here at Strand is apply the automation and the really great technology that's been built in that proactive space that can monitor systems, through an agent that you installed on the system, and apply that to those kind of reactive threat hunts, those reactive investigations to help us find the needle in the haystack, because I've got a lot of grey hairs that I can directly attribute to some of the incidents in the past that I've worked on, and some of the organisations that were in not great shape when by the time that they were talking to me on a call. So essentially me saying that organisations generally weren't very happy to see me because it meant that something had already gone wrong. From the regulatory side of things, it's very difficult to talk about specific incidents because of the nature of the confidentiality around it. But one thing that I've seen from quite a unique vantage point in basically being quite unpopular working for the regulator, going into businesses and being like, you've hacked and we're going to figure out if that was your fault because you didn't do enough to protect yourself, and then moving into being in that frontline response. I've got a lot of things I would say I would do differently if I was to go back to the regulator. I'd probably be a lot kinder. I'd have I suppose understood a lot more the difficulties that the organisation was going through, and perhaps not hammer them with quite as many questions as I did back then. So apologies to any organisations that are listening that did receive inquiries from me as a regulator. But amongst all of that, what I've seen is that there is incidents that I have been through which were the worst personal data breaches I think I've ever seen, in terms of the risk to individuals and the ultimate harm that could have come to end customers from a business having an incident, that the ICO have closed essentially immediately and not really looked into in any real detail. And there are also incidents that I'm looking at going, there is basically zero risk here to the individuals, but the ICO is going through weeks or months of investigation work, often because it's in the media, and I think there's quite a lot of appearances that need to be kept up there for the regulator to be seen to be looking into these cases. And it's all about the information they get in that kind of first day or the first 72 hours after an incident takes place. Often it is entirely wrong what goes on that form, or at the very least extremely incomplete. They're making bad decisions off of bad information, essentially, because these forensic investigations take so long and businesses are under pressure to provide the regulator with information. Those two things don't coexist very well at the moment.
No, that's fascinating. A lot of scars that you're carrying on your back there, and I do appreciate you sharing. And I think one thing that Jen, myself, quite often hear is the frustration from leaders that don't go for that digital forensics, don't go for the aftermath, and don't learn from it. Organisations sometimes just want to move on, patch the errors without going for that learning phase.
Yeah, and you've kind of touched on a bit of this in your sort of previous answers, Will. But let's get into it a little bit in terms of sort of talking about some sort of case scenarios and get your valued thoughts and advice. Yeah. Take us into the war room, and let's say it's 2 a.m. in the morning. There's a ransom note on the screen. Everybody's sweating. Certainly the CEO. What's the very first decision that the leadership team, typically get wrong, that pretty much sets the wrong tone for the following month or so?
Yeah, absolutely. So that very often there's been a lot of decisions made before the incident responders are on that call. Generally, it's measured in hours rather than minutes, right? So between the ransom note being found and the incident responders actually being on to walk the organisation through it, either because the business doesn't have that phone number, they don't have a retainer in place for somebody to call, they have to go out and find someone, they have to go through their insurer, and their insurer then assigns somebody. It all takes time. In that period of time, what essentially organisations are doing is hitting the panic button. Classic, I say probably 9 times out of 10, by the time we're landing on that first call at 2 a.m. in the morning, the business has already unplugged everything. They've completely isolated all of their network from the internet. They've probably shut a load of stuff down and taken a load of steps, which I understand because they're not experts. They're hitting the panic button and they just want whatever is happening to stop. So they hit that panic button. We lose so much evidence as a result of so many of those steps that businesses take in their own quite heavy-handed containment measures. There's so many systems out there that if you do shut them down, the logs are gone from that machine. You've got like firewalls, which generally will keep a couple of hours worth of logs on them. And if you don't prioritize them straight away, by the time we get involved, we don't have any of that evidence. And actually those businesses, I completely understand what they're doing, and they have to do something. They can't just wait for those hours while the threat actor's doing whatever they want in the systems. But that lack of knowledge of, do we have this kind of playbook for the first 2 hours, so we understand how we can contain our own network, but preserve evidence for the instant responders is, it's very, very much lacking in organizations. So what it looks like when we land on that first call is saying, okay, where are you at the moment? What have you done? And we have to then figure out a way around all of that to try and figure out what evidence is still going to be available, what we should prioritize and where we need to look. the flow that we go through is containment, eradication, and then investigation. So we need to get the threat actor out of the systems. Let's make sure that there is nothing that's been left behind that's going to enable them to get back in. That is absolutely key. Everything downstream of that relies on you getting that right. You can have the best recovery in the world, but if you haven't got rid of the threat actor in the first instance, you're going to end up back at day zero again if you've not got rid of them clearly. And the real key question is, how can you be sure that you've gotten rid of them if you don't know how they got in the first place? And again, these two things just don't quite coexist well enough at the moment, in terms of it may take us days to do a forensic investigation and identify the root cause of the incident, how they got back in, but we have hours to say we've got rid of the threat actor and we can now actually start going through the recovery process. So you end up assuming risk in almost every incident due to that prioritization of, we kind of are 80% sure how they've got in, but is that enough? Does that provide us with enough confidence to actually crack on with the recovery, or do we want to look for that fabled 100%? And many incident responses will tell you that you never truly get there.
In your experience, obviously you've investigated a lot of attacks. What's the most sophisticated attack that you've been involved in? One that made you think, wow, and what made that so challenging and ultimately so difficult to resolve?
Yeah, so there's obviously the advanced persistent threat incidents that we spoke about before. I've seen those hit internet service providers. I've seen them hit telecommunications companies, massive entities that you will know and have interacted with at some point in your life. Those are super hard to unpick because of the technical sophistication of the threat actor and the fact that they're very quiet. This is not a ransomware incident. It's very often not financially motivated. They're there for information and they're there for data. The technical sophistication there is because the difficulty in investigation there is because they're so quiet. You're looking at a needle in a haystack. You don't have an obvious malicious event to kind of anchor the investigation around. When it comes to the more common like ransomware incidents, though, we're seeing definitely a rise in sophistication in threat actors. Dealt with an incident, it was a good number of months ago now, where the threat actor did manage to re-enter the system. They got back into the environment to cause more havoc. What they were doing, without going into, I suppose, too much kind of deep technical detail, was got into the environment, picked a server, and then they brought their own virtual machine into the environment and installed that onto the server itself. So the forensic evidence was basically saying to us, okay, well, we can see that all of the malicious activity is originating from this one server, but there is nothing telling us, like, there's no incoming connections onto it. We don't know how they're actually getting onto that server in the first instance. The answer was they were already there. They just had their own machine, this tiny little virtual machine that they were running on it, where they could do whatever they want, right? Because it's a threat actor created machine, doesn't have the organization's antivirus on it, their EDR on it. It's not a part of their monitoring. It is essentially just a piece of shadow IT. It's a bit like if your IT guy had spun up or bought a new laptop that nobody knew about. That's essentially what the threat actor was doing in order to operate from. That was, difficult to unpick just by virtue of the size of the environment and also some assumptions that had been made, because the internal incident response team thought, okay, we know who the threat actor is here. We know how they operate, so we're going to look for how they operate. The threat actor had changed how they operated and had come up with this new methods. So there's a little bit of blinkered thinking going on, but also a bit of, just new methods that the threat actors are undertaking. The final thing that I'll say on this is, and this is an area where something becoming actually less technical makes it harder to investigate, is so many threat actors at the moment are moving away from using malware for their persistence. So when I say persistence, I mean the thing they install so they can keep on coming back into the environment. Used to be, 18 months ago, they'd use remote access Trojans and all of these kind of fancy malware terms that we'll have heard of before. These days, the threat actors like to use TeamViewer. They like to use AnyDesk and Splashtop and all of these legitimate, like, enterprise-grade remote access tools. Quite often, they will come into an environment and see, the organization is using TeamViewer. I'm just going to uninstall it from one server and reinstall our own version on it. And again, incident responders just had to adapt their approach there, because in the midst of that 2 a.m. war room where we're trying to figure out what's been installed and not, if the question we ask to the business is, okay, do you use TeamViewer legitimately? And they go, yes. And we go, great, we will discount that as malicious. You're going to miss that one version of it that isn't. That is not technically sophisticated from the threat actor. They're using just a nice normal piece of software that everybody's used probably over the course of their corporate lives. But it makes it super difficult to actually threat hunt and understand exactly what's going on in the environment and make sure that we get the threat actors out. So yeah, things that are complicated for us may actually be super simple from the threat actor's perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, you've been the principal investigator, as we touched on earlier, at the ICO. Talking honestly, when a company is breached and reports it, what percentage is usually softening the truth or just plain bullshit? What's the one thing that organisations typically think they can hide, but is always, comes to the forefront when investigated?
So a major piece of this is around data exfiltration. So many people focus on the confidentiality aspect of a data breach, i.e. what has been taken, what of the customer's personal data has been taken by this threat group, is going to be released on the dark web, is going to be sold, etc. If I'm doing a technical investigation, proving exactly what has been exfiltrated is one of the hardest parts of the investigation. Very often, given enough time, we'll figure out how the threat actor got into the system. Given enough time, we'll figure out what persistence mechanisms they've deployed. It may be now impossible for us to say it is these 1,000 files that have been exfiltrated, because the logging evidence, it just isn't there. And unless the organization has actually some really good monitoring systems in place, proving what data has left the environment is really, really difficult, even on a raw forensic investigation standpoint. Now, what that leads to is we may know that an organization or a threat actor generally exfiltrates data. Right? We can look at Akira, the ransomware group, and we go, they almost always take information from the organization's environment. We may have received proof of life from the threat actor where they've sent an email in saying, look, here's a sample of some of the files that we've taken. We may know beyond any doubt that exfiltration has occurred, but not have the forensic evidence to prove it. And what will be reported in that scenario is there is no conclusive evidence of data exfiltration, because that is, I guess, a fact in the investigation can't prove it because the logging evidence isn't there, and the organisation and the law firms would rather the ICO read an ambiguous "there's no evidence of data exfiltration" rather than a "there's no evidence of it, but we know it happened" wording. So data exfiltration is a massively misreported area of these kind of communications with the ICO, and it stems from the fact that organisations and everybody else treats them like ogres, the big scary regulator that isn't going to understand. And our job is to say things that are going to get this case closed as quickly as possible and get them to take their spotlight elsewhere, rather than saying, what would actually get us there is if we prove an effective response, we prove we know what we're doing, and we show that we have properly considered all of the relevant information as far as we need to.
I think that's tremendously important. And I know personally, I've spoke to leaders, for instance, that have been approached by ransomware groups that claim to have their data, and ultimately a lot of the data that are presented as evidence is perhaps stuff from 5-6 years ago that was involved in a previous breach, for instance. So it is really important for organisations of all scale to actually check, engage the likes of yourself, Will, to ensure that these claims are legitimate and are not just being extorted and being bluffed.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's an interesting part. I gave a talk a number of weeks ago around kind of ransomware negotiations and like conversations with criminals, where we've been having these negotiations on behalf of businesses with the threat group to talk about potential payment of ransom for recovery of systems, etc. And a lot of it, there's a bad stigma around having those negotiations with the threat actors, right? The NCSC say don't do it, the SEO say don't do it, but there is sometimes a lot of value in doing it, even if you have no intention of paying the ransom at the end of it, such as you can ask them to prove their leverage, and they will quite often provide you with a file tree to say, this is what we've exfiltrated. They can provide proof during that conversation because from their side, it's leverage. They're increasing their leverage against you by providing you with that information. But it is a very viable means for an organization in the absence of forensic data to understand what the risk is, what data has gone, and how they can actually mitigate that risk, who they need to notify, which individuals have had their data impacted, etc. So there's, again, that juxtaposition of maybe sometimes the best way of protecting individuals is to negotiate and is to have conversations with these threat groups, despite the fact that the regulator, whose job it is to protect those individuals, would rather you didn't.
Yeah, I've seen many instances where the hackers, for instance, have actually returned the keys or returned and actually educated organizations. There are white hackers out there and ethical ones. Not that we condone it, but that is something that happens from time to time. And moving on from that, Ollie, very briefly, could you share with us why security is important for SMEs as much as for enterprise organizations?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is part of the reason that we started working in the space that we work in today. We saw that of all the ransomware incidents that take place across the market, only the top 20% actually ever have investigations carried out. So actually there's an 80% of the market, which is all your SMEs, are struggling to afford or get the right skills in the instance of an incident. Difficulty with that is obviously they have customer data. They need to recover in an effective way. 60% of those SMBs that get hit by a ransomware are out of business within 6 months. So I think those stats really just scream the point that the right incident response needs to be in place, but it needs to be accessible for that market. The balance of cost versus value, unfortunately, gets blown out the water with the price of some of the services that are required. So I think innovation in that space really, as much as technical innovation, actually needs to be accessibility for those SMEs, so that A, they can get the right services when they're going through the process of an incident, but B, they can also remain compliant with the regulator. We've had new legislation come out last year that's actually pushing more weight onto those SMEs to say, if you are within an incident, then you're going to have new rights for the ICO to come in and check that you've done all of the right things. So then you have this growing concern of actually, well, those fines that we see go through only hitting really big organizations. Well, actually, they're going to start coming downstream as we start to take data more seriously in different jurisdictions.
No, I appreciate you sharing there. And Will, you've previously said that incident response is still a craft trade. What happens to the investigation quality when traditional teams are perhaps juggling half a dozen concurrent instances? Does the smaller client, the SME, for instance, do they get an intern while the banks and the insurers get the experts?
Yeah, so I think that incident response teams could quite often be a lot smaller than you'd envision. At the end of the day, for an organisation to build out an incident response capability, the talent's very expensive, and you've got unpredictable revenue there in terms of you might have 5 incidents one month, you might have 0 the next month. So these teams could quite often be quite small unless you're dealing with the massive incident response players that cater to the enterprise market. So I wouldn't necessarily say that you have maybe the smaller businesses getting the kind of the associate and the big organizations getting the senior responder. What's more likely is that they're both getting all of them, and everybody is just essentially stretched thin. The quality of the incident response naturally goes down, and things get missed in the event that the incident responders are being overworked, seeing too much in terms of caseload coming through, and not really knowing where an incident is going to go, right? We might go in and go, actually, this is quite straightforward. The organization's got a load of backups. We can recover. Bish, bash, bosh, we're all done. It may well be that we come in and find that is absolutely not the case, and this is going to be a multi-week long recovery process. Actually, assigning resources is very difficult in an incident response team, and looking after the individuals in that team is kind of even harder. Especially when we all know that those calls happen and these incidents happen at 5:30 on a Friday. They never happen nicely at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon when you've got nothing on. So there's this huge issue really in terms of resourcing and providing all the businesses that need responses the resources that they need in order to respond to them effectively. And that is probably why it is such an expensive service and essentially prices the SMEs out unless they have cyber insurance or some other means of payment for the team to come in.
No, I appreciate you sharing. And on the insurance part, Ollie, insurance is certainly harder to get now. And if a mid-sized organisation is hit tomorrow and their insurer denies the claim, maybe they say it's nation-backed, for instance, is that effectively death sentence for that SME, or what happens to the bill in that scenario?
Yeah, so I think in a large number of insurance cases, the insurer won't pay out. Now, we kind of see that across the insurance industry anyway, right? You see that in the car space, in the housing space, right? That is roughly how it's designed. I think for SMEs, the really core thing is it doesn't have to be a death sentence. What it does need to be is that when you sign on to a policy, you fundamentally look at what constitutes success in a claim and make sure that if you're committing to having some software in place, or you're committing to having some process and compliance in place, that you absolutely make sure you do that as a course of business priority, not technical priority, not cyber priority. And I know all these words get thrown around a lot, but fundamentally, your compliance to that policy, like any insurance policy, is absolutely paramount, because that day might not be this year and it might not be next year, but you should always be prepared for the fact that an incident will take place. If you move with that mentality, you will not fall into the 60% of insurance policies that won't pay out when that happens, because they've missed something, they've not reviewed it properly. And again, those 60% of SMBs that end up going under in that 6 months following a ransomware incident, you don't need to be in there either, but it does take proper planning and proper business etiquette around your IR plan, your disaster recovery, and your compliance with your insurance policy.
I appreciate you sharing, and I think muscle memory is certainly one thing that puts organisations ahead in times of crisis. And Ollie, and then of course I'd be keen to gain your perspective on it. But ultimately, companies spend tens of millions on prevention tools. Why do they still crumble when these tools arrive? Is it because perhaps they don't fine tune, they don't have the know-how to use these correctly, or is it something else?
So the biggest thing for me is that when I realized that these threat actors are operating in enterprise organizations that have office spaces, and there'll be 15,000 of them turning up to work in an office space, they have a boardroom. They go into that boardroom and they talk about the available proactive tooling, and there'll be smart people, talented people with bad intentions, unfortunately. And they will talk in that room about the latest proactive tooling. They will work out ways to get around that tooling. Fundamentally, I think the average, I had a number on one of our papers, the average number of alerts that an enterprise organization receives on a daily basis is somewhere around the 4,000 mark. There's 4,000 maybes. Now, there are some tools to help deal with that, but fundamentally, if you wanted full security, you would say, I want someone to have a look at each one and validate that it's not one of these groups trying to get through the door. Maybe they successfully did. Maybe they're using a piece of legitimate software to go under the detection radar. Fundamentally, I think that is still happening, which is why we say part of your cyber resilience stack should include that going wrong, right? You experiencing that breach, you needing to recover.
I think to add on to that, I mean, the decision of what endpoint detection and response software, for example, that you use is a decision an organization will make once a year, maybe once every 3 years, and they will evaluate it at that point. And every single day after they make that decision, there is a threat actor who gets to evolve, who gets to develop further, who gets to figure out ways around that tooling. And if they figure that out on day, when an organization's 100 days into their brand new shiny endpoint detection and response contract, the endpoint detection and response loses its value for that one particular attack. EDRs are amazing. They're great pieces of technology, but there's so many of these tools that I think need to be reframed as these are not silver bullets. You don't install this and suddenly this is going to stop all attacks. Or you should always see them as, or ever see them as, is ways of detecting when something is already going wrong. And at the end of the day, when it does start to go wrong, you don't generally at the moment fall back on tools, you fall back on people. So where I see these tools failing at the moment is they'll pick, let's say Sentinel-1, for example, awesome tool, used it so many times, incredible at detecting and preventing threats. But when it tells you something's going wrong here, there's malware on that machine, quarantines the malware, it has stopped the malware, not the threat actor in that situation. There is still a threat group on the other side of this attempting to, they're going to come back, they're going to try something new. And if you're entirely reliant on the tool and nobody sees that alert and goes, hang on a second, how did that get there in the first place? Why have we even been in a situation where Sentinel-1 is telling us there's malware on that machine? Let's understand this. Was it because a user has downloaded something dodgy from the internet, or is it because there's a threat actor that's come in via our VPN and has attempted an active intrusion? If you don't get that level of insight, you can't blame the tools for when something goes wrong. It's told you everything that it was designed to tell you. It's given you all the information that it's there to give you. You've not acted on it. You've not gathered all that additional context. So you really always need to have very, very good people and very, very good deep levels of investigation ability around these proactive tools if you actually want to see them reach as high a success rate as you can in preventing incidents.
And very briefly, do you think tool consolidation is effective for organizations in 2026, or do you think organizations should be leveraging more?
I think that there's a lot of tool hopping that takes place and consolidation where organizations are saying, oh, new shiny security products, let's go over there. Oh, new shiny security products, let's go over there. And this just happens repeatedly, right, in terms of the cycles. The advice that I always give to them, which is probably counterintuitive considering that the co-founder of a software vendor, but is that you can you use what you've got right first before you start kind of layering it on top. If you've got an endpoint detection and response software, configure it properly, put the time in, get a decent SOC behind it to actually review the information that's coming through it. If you've got a SIEM solution, make sure the relevant information is going into it. So actually just configure what you've got right, rather than always thinking, oh, this isn't working and let's move on to the next and let's move on to the next kind of shiny tool. Actually different when it comes to forensics and incident response, because naturally there isn't a whole lot of tooling out there at the moment. It's a very consultancy-based service, which is where we at Strand come in. But for those proactive tools, yeah, people hop around and try and consolidate and treat the security like a commercial problem, or actually it's probably more of a knowledge issue and just configuring the tools properly. And the very last thing, because I know you said that I should be brief for this one, is they do not configure them with like threat intelligence at their core. I know how threat actors gain access to systems. I've seen how they've done it over many, many months. It's still working to them. They're probably not going to change much anytime soon because it's working for them and they keep on getting into businesses and keep on making money out of it. If you've got a team, quite rightly, who are your IT team or your internal security team who have never been through an incident, don't have that amount of context, how can they configure it to protect them against a threat that they don't know or they don't understand? So there is just that separation between the people that know what needs securing, which is the incident responders who see how the attacks happen, and the people doing the securing, who are the proactive security folks who haven't been through the incident response process. And I think that we should probably also share a little bit more information.
No, fair enough. And talking about obviously going, looking forward, obviously we're seeing more reports of agentic AI, autonomous bots that are hacking without any humans guiding them. How much have you seen, out there, this type of attack? Anyway, are we at a point or close to, where AI fights AI and we just pretty much stand back and watch?
Yeah. I don't think we're there yet, and I don't expect that kind of imminently. The reality is that, as I say, the threat actors use great tooling to discover vulnerabilities. They're not AI, they are automations, they're automated scanners and technology that's been around for eons now, and that's working for them. What they are looking to do is be able to conduct more attacks quicker. And AI will naturally be something that they explore in order to have these kind of autonomous incidents taking place. It's something that we're exploring. We saw an incident, again, a number of months ago now, where somebody had received, the classic message from impersonating the CEO. And it normally ends with somebody going off and buying some iTunes gift cards from a shop down the road and sending them over. But in this case, the person received a WhatsApp message from somebody purporting to be their CEO and said, I've got a task that I need you to complete. Do you mind jumping on this Teams call quickly? And they sent them a Teams meeting invite. And the individual clicked on it, joined the Teams meeting invite, and saw their CEO for a second or two. And then the Teams meeting dropped. They got another WhatsApp message saying, sorry, my signal's really bad, but anyway, this is what I need you to do. And then went into the proper scam. Now, it was a deep fake of the CEO, essentially, and it would only lasted for a second or two because otherwise the person had realized it was fake, etc. But it just provided that extra element of I'm actually talking to them, and now the guard is down for the remainder of this WhatsApp conversation that's happening. I've seen that once. Let's not pretend that this is an epidemic and is going to start hitting all organizations, but it's a sign of things to come. Where we see AI used essentially all the time at the moment is in phishing campaigns. It's where all these new technologies start, because it's the bread and butter of these threat groups and of incidents that's taking place. It used to be the fact that a threat actor had to choose, am I going to do a super personalized phishing attack against this individual or this business, or am I going to do a really unpersonalized wide net approach that I'm going to send to 100,000 businesses? they don't have to choose anymore. They can do super personalized phishing attacks against the 100,000 businesses by utilizing AI to write the emails and to design them and to research who the CEO is and put the right names in, etc., which leads us to see a lot of very sophisticated, very difficult to detect phishing emails at the moment that can happen over multiple turns of conversation. We're seeing it more often now where the threat actor will essentially act as a legitimate customer for a few days or a few weeks, and only then will send a malicious link into the chain when the person's guard down. They think they're about to get a deal. They think that they're going to land a client, whatever it may be. So yeah, that's the main use case of AI at the moment, is definitely in phishing and just helping threat actors not have to choose between a low volume of personalized attacks and a high volume of scattergun attacks. They can kind of combine the best of both worlds.
Yeah, it's definitely getting stickier and stickier for sure. And look, let's go back to a bit of vendor hate. All the vendors, every single vendor promises AI powered security, and it's clearly hard to differentiate the quality from the detritus. Now, you guys are building this type of AI powered tech. Help us cut through the noise. What is marketing AI? It's basically just writing light touch summaries, etc., versus operational AI that is actually stopping a breach effectively.
For sure. I'll probably let Ollie answer the second half of this, but from my perspective, there's a load of really, really good security tools out there that have been around for a while, and like methodologies for incident responders and forensic investigators, like using our Yara rules and our Sigma rule sets and detection methodologies, etc. There's a reason that those are still in place, and it's because they're very good and they are customizable enough to adapt to new threats. Somebody that's built technology to do automated digital forensic investigations, know that AI is not at all a silver bullet. You cannot dump 1 million logs into ChatGPT and go, please, can you tell me if there's anything malicious in here? Doesn't work like that, right? You need that combination of, let's use these tools and let's build on these tools that have been used by security practitioners for years, because they work and because they do really great things, to do what they're good at, which is the detecting of known threats, of doing these rule-based analysis, of having a look at, when John shouldn't have been RDPing into that server at 3 p.m. last night. Let's have a look at the 1 million files that we have to see if any of them come up on known malware lists. Let's check the reputation of these IP addresses. You don't need AI for any of this. This is stuff that is built into the tools and built into like pre-existing workflows, and probably should remain that way, right? Because they're rule driven, and that's not what the AIs are great at. What the AIs are really good at is essentially decision making over that data, kind of correlating some of these information sources together, and do something slightly that's kind of deterministic, such as let's look at in isolation a small group of activity and ask, is there anything in here that we should be concerned about? Is there anything in here that we maybe want to drill into further? So I think where the difference in my mind between kind of good AI and bad AI is, bad AI in cybersecurity at the moment is the one that promises to do everything, and they throw AI at every single problem, and you end up with a load of hallucinations. You end up with stuff getting missed, and a very unwieldy product at times that is just giving you more noise than anything else. And the good ones are the ones that are just approaching the gaps in the market, so that are looking at this web of security tools and saying, okay, what was not previously doable that is now doable from using this technology, rather than let us attack that's entirely ground up. It may be sometime where we can just throw it all at an AI and go, listen, what's happened here? But right now, using it as a kind of a logic layer or a reasoning layer on top of these pre-existing rule sets, these pre-existing detection methodologies, is what's working for us at Strands.
Yeah, it's the old cliche, jack of all trades, master of none. I think it's for sure, and I think, look, sticking on the ChatGPT, the perils of chat, and Claude and Gemini, it's becoming more and more of a major issue within many organisations, that employees are clearly cut and pasting a lot of high and low level company secrets into these platforms. From a forensic standpoint, is shadow AI becoming the new insider threat as such? Can you actually track that data once it's out there and leaked?
So when somebody puts that information into ChatGPT, they're presuming they've got, there's very secure ways of using it. If you ignore for a second the fact that that data is going off to a far-reaching server that you have no control or understanding of, there's only a certain amount that you can do to really retain it in your possession at the moment that you put it into that chat box. I've not seen personally any situations where data that's confidential information that somebody's put into ChatGPT has come back to bite them because it appears in somebody else's responses at some point. Because I think that the model providers recognize that if they're ever going to get into enterprises, they need to have that sorted, and they need to commit to not using these chats to train their models, etc. The only times we have seen it is where people, frankly, just didn't set their permissions up right and have published these sensitive chats, then they appear in Google search rankings, etc. But with that said, from my side, I see a lot of businesses just outright banning it, saying you're not using ChatGPT at all. And I think that's slightly daft because they're going to use it. It makes their life easier. It means that they don't have to do quite as much work on a daily basis. Your employees are going to use ChatGPT. They're going to use Claude. They're going to use anything that is going to make their lives easier. And if you ban it, that is what then creates it as kind of a shadow IT and a shadow service, because you essentially don't use it. They're going to use it anyway, and you have absolutely no control over it. You have no ability to train them on how to use it right, how to configure it so that it's used securely. And it's a much better idea to accept that your employees are going to be using this technology and train them to do it properly than it is to outright ban it and lose all of that visibility. I don't know if Ollie, if you've got any thoughts on that, having been in the professional services world.
Yeah, 100%. It was how we always led, right? There are ways to configure these models on your own infrastructure within your own network so your data is protected. Is fundamentally where we need to be moving to. It's how we do things at Strand. There's no point where our systems reach out to the public internet, use APIs or use public services, but actually what we do is we host it all in our own environment, and our staff are able to use discrete, safe, well-governed, well-configured LLMs and able to reap the benefits of the new technology.
Absolutely.
Just wanted to add to that as well. In recent news, I know there's been a high-level government official, effectively a Ciso in the US, who was enforcing this policy throughout his department and then dumped a load of confidential information into ChatGPT. It's quite prevalent in the news at the moment, and we'll keep an eye on that and have a conversation at some point in the future in terms of the impact of that. But the point being, I think, is important that these things need to be led from the top down as well as the bottom up.
And there's probably a conversation for another day, but some super interesting recent court cases where people's ChatGPT conversations have been used as essentially discovery during the course of those criminal cases. So you probably, if you're going to go out and cause harm for somebody, you probably shouldn't ask ChatGPT where the best place to hide a body is after the fact. But
it's search history on steroids, isn't it? Basically.
Certainly.
Absolutely.
So, Will, look, the average tenure of a Ciso is shrinking. What is the industry so good at protecting data, but so bad at protecting its professionals and people?
Yeah, so from our side, they I think a lot of non-technical hiring managers and C-suite executives, etc., essentially see cybersecurity as a single job. They're hiring somebody with cybersecurity expertise, and they expect them to be their forensic investigator. They expect them to be their GDPR expert. They expect them to be their SOC, their monitor, an expert in EDR, an expert in essentially all areas of cybersecurity. That isn't an individual. That's a team of people with very varying skill sets. Myself, I'm a digital forensics incident response expert. I'm a pretty good software engineer. I've never spent any time as a SOC analyst, for example, sitting and actually just trawling through live telemetry to try and find ongoing threats in that moment in time. It isn't my skill set. It would drive me insane, I suspect. But there are other people out there who are exceptional at it because they have that kind of eye for detail, they have the ability to sit and go through that information just day in, day out in order to protect the organization. What happens and what causes the burnout is when, yes, you're asking people to do too much, and that is a problem not just in cybersecurity but in every industry. But when you are expecting, when you make a cybersecurity hire, for them to be an expert in all cybersecurity rather than treating it as there is many individual disciplines within this massive world of cyber. Which one do we need right now as a business? And let's get the right person to fill that gap. we just see an awful lot of people that wear far too many hats as a result of that. But I'd be interested to get Ollie's thoughts on this from, I suppose, somebody, with the outside in, looking into the cybersecurity world and seeing all these instant responders that we talk to on a daily basis. What your read is there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, like you say, it's the wearing of many hats. I think also the amount of stress that comes with these roles, and it can depend on different roles. But you have some horrifying cases of CISOs that have, essentially hit death's door during the process of an incident response or something happening to an enterprise organization. That yes, your CISO needs to be the person designed to make high-level decisions in that situation, right? You can have other people on your board who are pushing for business services, but your CISO should have enough information that they need to balance safety and the right time to come back online with customer risk, business risk. But fundamentally, how it works in practice is that everyone is so high stress in that situation that, they have this incredible human impact. And I think there's no amount of finance that can make you want to put your life in that situation. So I think the turnover and the drive to have people in those roles, and then subsequently the skills that actually get compounded over time, lessens, or it becomes a much smaller pool because the ask is just incredibly high.
Yeah.
And Ollie, what's one skill, non-technical but human, that you look for in responders, but perhaps isn't obvious in the CV?
So describing to you just then the stress management and some of those kind of incredibly tough situations as a CISO, if you're looking at an incident responder, that person, for all of their working day and probably a good portion of their personal time, is going to be dealing with the next company that's in that situation. So what I'll say is stress management, but that person has to be ready and willing at a personal level, not a technical level, to be able to talk to those boards, talk to those people who are probably going to be screaming, who are going to be on their knees and facing some existential moment in their business. They need to be able to deal with that stress and be able to take it in their stride, not deal with it as in bottle it up, but actually it's really tough. They have to have a certain characteristic that means that they're able to deal with a business's worst day every single day. They also need to be stepping in the room and building trust at the same time, which is why it can't just be a suppression of stress. It needs to be genuinely, they're capable of moving with the wind in that situation. And then the final point, I think, is they need to be able to tell those extremely stressed groups of people that they don't know sometimes, because everything that comes out of an incident responder's mouth needs to be based matter-of-factly. That can affect their insurance claim. It can affect what they say to the regulator, so it can affect downstream fines. It has to be matter of fact, and there are going to be situations during the life cycle of an incident where an incident responder will not know. The company will be absolutely pushing and screaming for the answers, and they need to have the authority and the confidence to say either I need some more information, I need some more time, we're doing everything we can. Let me hold your hand through this, but fundamentally, I can't tell you right now.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, it's all communication at the end of the day. Like if you're going to go into the world of instant response, every day for you is going to be somebody else's worst day ever that you're supporting them through. And if you're a lot of forensic investigators, and this is not a dig, but this is just a matter of life, like to have their head in the data, like to be going through it all and then writing out a report, and it goes out to the client, and the sales guys will go and drum up more work, and so the cycle continues. You can't be like that in instant response. That information, you can be on daily, sometimes twice daily calls with senior figures at an organisation, demanding answers, understanding if their business is going to survive. There's a lot on their shoulders, and therefore there's a lot of on the incident responders' shoulders, and they need to be able to communicate that clearly under immense stress and pressure. And as Ollie says, he's absolutely right. Know when to say I don't know in that scenario, because you will find yourself saying it an awful lot in the early days.
And for our audience, listen, hit the like button if you'd like for the team to rejoin us in the near future to talk through what a career pathway looks like for a digital forensics and incident responder.
Absolutely. So, look, we've talked a lot about, early years, cyber, online safety. We've had many conversations and done quite a number of episodes on the I guess the challenges, the increasing challenges, and certainly in terms of AI-driven threats for parents, for carers, for teachers, and of course for kids and young adults. Let's talk a little bit about deepfake. We know it takes around 20 photos on average to build a convincing AI deepfake of a child or a minor. What are some of the sort of the harsh truths that parents need to be hearing about this digital dossier, this AI identity theft, that maybe they're unintentionally fueling by oversharing pictures and information on social media platforms?
Yeah, I mean, I wish I had an answer to this as a problem, right? And it's going to become extremely complicated. There'll be a lot of conversations happening around it in the future because it is becoming a problem and will continue to be on the rise in terms of these malicious uses of this technology. I feel quite strongly that actually, if we end up in a world where we have to tell parents that they can't share photos of their kids with their family on social media, etc., then something's gone pretty horribly wrong during the process, and actually putting that responsibility on them as parents rather than on the platforms and on the model creators and the social media platforms themselves to find a solution to that problem before they make this technology extremely widely utilized and widely distributed. We're probably putting the responsibility in the wrong place in that scenario. But at the end of the day, it is a real risk at the moment, and I'd say the only real way of ensuring that nobody can ever generate a deepfake of you at present is probably to not have a digital presence at all. Yes, it takes took 20 photos to generate a deepfake a year ago. It takes 1 or 2 now to generate a decent one, with like Google Gemini getting really, really good at image generation and all of these other models. It will take a single photo really in probably the next month or so. We'll have the technology in order to do that. And then image generation will turn to video generation, and it becomes a whole mess. The kind of mistakes, or not really mistakes, but the oversharing that's going to enable people to make deepfakes of us has already happened. The solution very much needs to be on the people making this technology to find guardrails that will prevent that, not for the parents to go back and scrub their entire internet history.
No, 100%. I couldn't agree more. And just going to the more senior side of society, we're also looking at the elders and people who are typically in their later years are certainly looking at like they're being more and more targeted for AI voice cloning, vishing, if you will. And so again, is there and I know there's no quick fix to any of these things, but is there maybe one simple kind of non-tech family safe word protocol that maybe you could share that say every house could agree on to stop these criminals in an instant?
Yeah, I think there's never always one clean thing. But I think in terms of awareness, especially for the older generation, especially for families, if you're going to have something like vishing, like voice over WhatsApp, that's faking a family voice, the thing to be clear for is if there's a sense of urgency, if there's something that just feels a little bit off, that they need something done without the ability for you to verify anything, and it's not done in a safe family chat or anything like that, I think the thing is, don't be embarrassed to double check. Go and ask a few people. Like, nothing is ever so important that you can't double check it. Nothing should ever be happening on a one-to-one basis, even with your family, that you wouldn't have said, oh, did your sister mean to send this? Or like, is your sister okay? Or whatever the context might be. But if you've got that pressure, often with scammers on the phone, it's, but we need this right now on the phone. Right, okay, so you're probably not my bank, because my bank would be happy with going around some cycle of validation or verification, and it would be okay for me to call them back in a minute. So I think if you're getting that sense, double check on your family chat, maybe check with someone else what's going on. That's the big signal. Don't be embarrassed to then go and check. Don't be embarrassed to say you don't know or you're not sure. And don't think anyone's going to take it personally if you say, just wanted to double check that was you and you do need my help.
Absolutely, more and more so. I think it's important. And going in, let's talk about the education side. Cyberbullying, algorithmic grooming. We've seen some high profile TV shows that I think have had a hugely positive impact on shining a light on many of these things. And in terms of from a teacher's perspective, if kids are typically, bottling these things up or too ashamed to share it, is there anything that you think are maybe some silent signals in this sort of the classroom environment that teachers could spot as a telltale sign or a cry for help?
Yeah, so I actually think that these signals are very much in the same ballpark as physical bullying. So I think for those teachers, what they need to be looking at is behavioural changes. You get taught the same with physical bullying, but with cyberbullying as well. They're a disconnection from the world around you. You go internal and you become anxious, you become concerned. Things are going on in your head because you're concerned about the next time this is going to pop up. Teachers on the front line need to be looking at the kids they're working with and looking at any discrete changes, any increases in anxiety. That the problem with that growth period in any child's life is that a lot of those things can come with just getting older. But what needs to be the case is those safe spaces for those behavioural changes to be talked about and to be addressed. And the teachers need to be there and the parents need to be there in creating a healthy communication around why that might be happening. Maybe it is a personality or a growth change, but actually maybe something is happening in the background. Maybe it's a relationship trouble. Maybe it is some bullying. Maybe, the worst case is happening. The only way that can be talked about is if a safe space is driven from the responsible adults in that situation.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing there, Ollie. And Will, we teach stranger danger in the streets, but in the gaming world, like Roblox, for instance, Discord, the predators are lurking. They're disguising themselves as a cool friend is giving away free skins and vouchers. How do we teach 10-year-olds to spot social engineering without ruining their fun?
I think it's a lot of what Ollie's said in kind of a prior answer there, in terms of they essentially to deal with this issue at its roots, there needs to be an understanding of generally what to do and what not to do when interacting with kind of strangers on the internet. You've got, ultimately, all of these scams are financially motivated in some way, shape or form, right? Unless it's just classic bullying on the internet. If somebody's being scammed, if somebody's being social engineered, there is a financial motive. So the idea of no matter how convincing somebody is, no matter how kind of cool or friendly they are, we do not do financial transactions with people we don't know over the internet. We don't provide our passwords over the internet. We don't do these kind of list of things that are just hard and fast rules that no matter how friendly or how good the social engineer on the other side is a line in the sand that is not crossed. It's probably a good place to start. Essentially treated as these are going to get better, they're going to get harder to detect. They all have the same motive, and that motive won't change, and it's money. And if we can teach kids to recognize when people are trying to exploit them for financial gain or for some kind of scam, that should hopefully stand up to, regardless of how cool or friendly or convincing the social engineer is. Maybe I might end up being entirely wrong on that point, and it's an interesting space to watch. And I hope that somebody out there comes up with a solution for it to try and put these scammers to bed. But I think that's how I'd approach it.
Thank you for sharing. And Ollie, to the 16-year-old thinking that learning tech, cybersecurity is pointless, especially if AI can write code. What's the single future-proof human skill, the human moat, that the bot, the AI, can never replicate, that's going to guarantee a high-paying job in 2030?
God, I wish I had the answer to that, Warren. I think the key thing to remember is whilst AI is really good at expediting roles, it doesn't remove the need for humans in those roles. So from a software engineering perspective, we've seen so much change in the way that we build applications, right? All the way from machine coding things back in the 90s, right up to the first languages that we'd use. Then we had these IDEs that actually had a lot of technical support and capability, and now we've got a layer of AI. What they can't do is they can't build applications in line with a business's specific way of doing things. with their specific set of customers. So like when we're at Strand, right, of course we use tooling to expedite things, but we never ever have our architecture or anything that might impact the security of our application. We don't have AI anywhere near that, right? That all has to be decision made by a human in the context of your company. So the other piece is, even some of the stuff that is expedited by AI, it needs to be assured before it gets deployed. If you're 16 years old and you're thinking, if I learn how to code, well, who cares, because an AI can do it. Well, actually, the skills you learn during that process compound over time. Like, I was a web developer when I was 18, and I don't develop websites today, but I still do take some of those skills and I still do apply them in the context of some of the different projects or some of the different customers that we have day to day. But all of that knowledge essentially compounded over time, right? So I learnt those skills and then I reapplied them in each of the jobs that I had. I don't think going and learning about the fundamentals of why we code, how to keep things secure would ever stop a career choice or a career journey. AI is not going to replace any of these things. What it's going to do is make them a lot quicker and a lot faster. But actually, that just means that we're going to reach some of the outcomes and goals quicker. So I would still heavily encourage people to learn about cyber, about networking, around architecture, around data security, because I think those spaces will be absolutely rife during the technology revolution of AI.
I appreciate you sharing. And to our audience, if you are studying and looking to develop in that area, make sure you hit the like button.
Guys, as we come to the back end of the episode, could you kind of just briefly share a bit more on Strand, your vision, mission, purpose, and what the future holds for you guys?
Yeah, absolutely. So our key focus is in the digital forensics part of incident response. We're there to cover off a load of the things that we've said here, right? In terms of the investigations are taking too long, that leads to kind of more harm to the business. It means that our incident responders and the people dealing with these types of attack are spending more time with their head buried in logs than they are talking a business through the process, getting them back up and running, doing what the business actually wants, which is to restore services and get to generating revenue again. That has huge impacts on the regulator, on harm to individuals, a load of things that just start with that initial bottleneck of the investigation that needs to take place when a cyber incident happens. That's what we work on at Strand, is the software to end-to-end go from, okay, an incident has taken place, to we now know how it happened. We have collected the evidence, we have investigated it, we understand how the threat actor got in, what they installed, what needs cleaned up, and what data has been exfiltrated, so that the incident responders and the individuals dealing with these types of incidents can, provide more proactive value to their customers to say, okay, the investigation is done. We've done it in 3 hours rather than 3 weeks. That means we can focus right now on getting you up and running, getting you back on your feet, and getting you through this pretty awful period. Where we're taking that is more into the kind of proactive world, the event-based monitoring stuff. Ollie said, in terms of enterprises having many thousands of alerts every single day, most of which don't get investigated because there is just far too many. But if you do have a automated forensic system that is taking a vast majority of the work away from the analyst to do that first pass of the investigation, suddenly maybe you can investigate all of them. And what would a world look like there when an organization doesn't have to prioritize what they look at, but can actually look into everything, can actually investigate all of those alerts, all of those unknowns, and come to a really high level of confidence of when they need to respond and when they don't. And that's our, vision for the products moving forward. But I'm sure Ollie and his role as the commercial side will have many more fancy words and things to say on that.
I'll say it in less and in fewer. The TLDR of Strand is just, can we get those timelines for a business suffering an incident down? Those 60% of businesses that are going to go out of business, can we bring that number down by reducing the time their service is out, by reducing the amount they have to spend on their forensics, etc.? So all of our brain power here at Strand goes into getting that outcome. We're doing a very good job of it, humbly. So if you're a business that's seeing that kind of stuff and you're interested, then that is our vision.
Yeah, and it's important tech, guys, game changing, what you're doing, and we wish you the very, very best of luck with things going forward. For any listeners who want to stay connected to Strand and, of course, Ollie and Will, respectively, then they can be reached out on LinkedIn, of course. So all that leaves me to say is a huge thank you to both of you. The community and all the listeners will have, I'm sure, found a huge amount of value in today's session. Great insight. And if people want to continue the discussion and for more sustained engagement, as always, we invite you to join the Secure CyberConnect community, where we offer a range of collaborative solutions for technology and security professionals at no cost. Big thank you, guys.
Thank you very much, Warren, Jay. Great chat.
Thank you, guys.